Think about your last free evening. You scrolled through something. You watched something. Maybe you laughed at a video a friend sent you, or lost an hour to a game on your phone without even noticing the time slide by. Now take all of it away. The screen, the app, the friend's message arriving instantly from 100 miles off. Take away the couch, the roof, the electric light holding back the dark. What is left is a fire, a circle of tired faces, and a night that stretches on for hours with absolutely nothing to fill it but each other. You might guess that people living tens of thousands of years ago, hunting to eat and hiding from things that hunted them, had no room left over for fun. That every waking hour must have gone to survival, and joy was a luxury they simply could not afford. That guess is wrong. And the story of how wrong it is might be one of the most human things you will ever hear about the ancient world. Because the moment the sun went down and the fire was built up high, something shifted in an ancient camp. The hunting was over. The gathering was done. And for a few hours, before the exhaustion of the day finally pulled everyone under, these people played and made music and told stories and painted and reached for feelings that had nothing to do with staying alive until morning. They needed to laugh just as much as they needed to eat, so they found a way. Start with the children, because this is where it begins, and it begins somewhere you would never expect. Two boys wrestling in the dirt outside the firelight look, at first glance, like nothing more than boys wrestling. But watch closer. One grabs the other around the middle, exactly the way you would grapple down a wounded animal that refuses to go still. A girl throws stones at a mark scratched into a tree again and again, and every single throw is quietly teaching her hand and her eye the same aim she will need years from now with a spear in the same grip. A group of children chase each other through the grass in a game with no name, darting and dodging and doubling back, and every sudden turn is the exact motion that will one day save one of their lives from a charging animal or a fall from a ledge. None of them know this is training. To them, it is only play, the purest kind, the kind you do because it feels good and because your friends are laughing beside you. The parents watching from near the fire know something different. They let it run on and on, this wrestling and throwing and chasing, because a body that has played hard as a child moves differently as an adult. The muscle remembers what the mind was never taught in words. Fun, in that firelit camp, was quietly the most important lesson being taught all day. And not one child sitting through it would have called it a lesson. Anthropologists who have spent time with the last hunting and gathering peoples left on Earth, groups whose way of life still echoes the ancient one in striking ways, have watched this same pattern play out generation after generation. Children mimic the hunt long before they are trusted with a real weapon. Small hands throw small stones at small targets for hours at a stretch, not because anyone forced them to practice, but because hitting the mark feels like winning a private little game. By the time a boy or girl in one of these communities is old enough to be handed a real spear or a real digging stick, their hands already know the motion, worn smooth by thousands of throws that were never once called practice. The ancient camps almost certainly worked the same way. A skill drilled through joy sinks in far deeper and far more permanently than a skill drilled through fear. As the light faded further and the youngest children were pulled in close against tired shoulders, a different kind of sound started to rise, and it is one that reaches all the way down to us today in a way almost nothing else from that world does. Somewhere in a cave in what is now southern Germany, a person once sat working a hollow bird bone with the sharp edge of a stone. It was the wing bone of a vulture, light and already hollow, the kind of thing you might overlook entirely unless you had already imagined what it could become. This person carved 5 small holes along its length, spaced with real care, and shaped one end into a mouthpiece. Archaeologists, led by Nicholas Conard, found the pieces of that flute in a cave called Hohle Fels, and nearby, in another cave called Geisenklösterle, they found others just as old, some carved from mammoth ivory, split open, hollowed by hand, and sealed back together. These flutes are more than 40,000 years old. They are, as far as anyone has ever found, the oldest musical instruments made by human hands. Picture the moment it was finished. The maker lifts it to their lips for the first time, in a cave lit only by a low fire, and blows. A note comes out, thin and strange and completely new to the world. Around them, faces turn. A second note, then a third. Fingers shift over the holes, and the sound climbs and falls, and for the first time in that cave, in that camp, in maybe the whole of that person's life, sound is not a warning, and it is not a word. It is only itself. It is beautiful, and everyone sitting near the fire feels it land somewhere that language cannot quite reach. Someone begins to tap a rhythm against a hollow log or their own chest, low and steady, and the flute rides on top of it. And for a few minutes, an entire group of exhausted, hungry, endangered people is simply, completely happy. That flute would not have stayed silent for long. Music like that pulled people in. It likely moved from hand to hand around the fire, each person trying the holes for themselves, laughing at the sounds that went wrong before something went right. A song that worked, that people liked, would have been played again the next night, and the night after that, passed down the same way a hunting trick was passed down, because it made the group feel like one thing instead of many separate, exhausted people. Music did not need a reason. It only needed ears. Not everyone reached for sound. Some reached for the walls themselves. Deep inside a cave carved by an underground river in what is now southern France, past chambers where cave bears had scraped out hollows to sleep in for the winter, someone carried a torch a very long way into total darkness. Somewhere in that string of stone rooms they crouched, dipped their fingers or a chewed stick into a paste of red ochre, and began to draw. A lion first, then another, then a whole pride, low slung and hunting, moving together across the wall in a way that made them look alive by flickering torchlight. Elsewhere in the same cave, someone pressed an open hand flat against the stone and blew pigment around it with their own breath, leaving a mark that is still there today, a print from a hand that stopped moving tens of thousands of years ago. These paintings, in the cave now called Chauvet, are roughly 36,000 years old. Nobody made them to be looked at casually. You do not carry fire that deep into the earth, past the reach of daylight, past the smell of the outside world, for something to glance at on your way past. Whoever painted those lions went there on purpose, in the dark, and stayed long enough to get every curve of muscle and motion right. It might have been ritual. It might have been memory made permanent, a way of holding on to an animal they had faced and needed to understand. It might, in its own way, have simply been the pure pleasure of making something beautiful exist where nothing had existed before. The same pull that moves a hand toward a flute or a stick toward the dirt to draw a shape for no reason at all except that it feels like something worth doing. We cannot ask them which it was. We can only stand where they stood and feel, even now, that the wall was never blank enough to leave alone. And back at the ordinary fire, on an ordinary night, without any cave or any flute at all, the oldest form of fun in the whole human story was happening quietly, the way it happened almost everywhere, almost every night. Someone was telling a story. An old hunter, maybe, describing the time the boar nearly caught him, stretching the danger a little larger with every telling, using his hands to show how close the tusks came, letting the children lean in at exactly the right moment. A grandmother describing why the moon disappears and returns, why the river bends where it bends, weaving an explanation into a tale with characters and danger and a shape that made it impossible to stop listening. These stories were entertainment in the truest sense, gripping enough that a whole tired group would stay awake past exhaustion just to hear how it ended. But they were carrying something heavier, too, folded invisibly inside the fun of it. Which plants would kill you? Which caves held danger? What their people believed happened after the last breath left the body. A child who had heard the story of the boar 100 times knew, without ever being lectured, exactly how a boar moved and exactly how afraid to be of one. Nobody sat that child down to teach a lesson. The lesson simply lived inside the story. And the story was fun enough that nobody ever had to be told to listen. And there was something else happening in that circle that had nothing to do with lessons at all. A group that had laughed at the same joke, gasped at the same near-death moment in the same telling, and finished the same story together, was a group bound a little tighter than it had been an hour before. The story did not just carry knowledge from the old to the young. It reminded everyone sitting in that firelight, night after night, that they belonged to the same small world, the same fragile little circle of survival, and that the person laughing beside them was someone worth trusting when the next danger came. Now come back to that same fire, later in the night, when the stories have wound down and the flute has gone quiet and only the last hard core of flame is left glowing in the pit. This is where the ancient world reached for something even stranger. Now and then, somewhere in the plants and fungi growing wild around a camp, people came across something that did far more than fill the stomach. Eaten by accident or on purpose after someone else had tried it first, certain things bent the mind in ways nothing else around them could. Colors moved. The dark seemed to breathe. A person could feel, for a short and overwhelming stretch of time, as if the wall between this world and some other one had thinned to almost nothing. They had no possible way to understand what was happening inside their own skull. There was no idea yet of a brain doing anything at all. so they explained it the only way available to them. Something from beyond had reached through and reached them. Archaeologists who study rock art in caves and rock shelters, among them the researcher David Lewis Williams, have argued that many of the strange, swirling, half-animal, half-human images left on ancient walls may be memories of exactly these kinds of altered, overwhelming states, whether reached through hunger, exhaustion, relentless drumming and dance around the fire, or occasionally through something eaten or breathed in from the world around them. Whichever door they walked through, the destination looked and felt the same. A journey outside the ordinary mind, brought back the only way it could be brought back, painted or carved or told in a story. Because there was no other language yet for what had happened. It was not something they understood. It was something they simply experienced, powerfully and without warning, and then tried, however they could, to hold on to. That, in the end, is the whole shape of it. Play that quietly built the bodies that would keep a whole camp alive. Music pulled from a hollowed bone that turned a circle of exhausted strangers into something closer to a family. A painted lion, deep in the dark, made by someone who needed it to exist. A story that taught a child everything they needed to know about danger, wrapped so tightly inside wonder that it never once felt like a lesson. And, now and then, something stranger still, reaching up out of the earth itself and pulling a mind somewhere it had never been. They were not simply surviving out there in the dark and the cold and the constant danger. They were living, laughing at a wrong note on a bone flute, leaning in at the exact right moment in a story they had already heard 100 times. Standing in torchlight in front of a wall of painted lions, feeling something they had no words for at all. The fire is long gone now, and so are they. But the flute has been found. The lions are still on the wall, and somewhere in you, on your last ordinary evening, laughing at something small with people you love, the very same thing that pulled them toward that fire, night after night, tens of thousands of years ago, is still quietly, unmistakably alive.